Welcome to Madang Podcast. Today's special guest is Reverend Dr. Munther Isaac, a Palestinian Christian theologian who is the director of the Bethlehem Institute of Peace and Justice. In this episode, he shares about genocide, Nakba, settler colonialism, theology of empire, theology of genocide, and his latest book, Christ in the Rubble, Faith, the Bible, and the Genocide in Gaza. Please stay tuned. We live in a time of crisis upon crisis, and yet the church is silent. The need, or better put, the demand for a new trajectory of faith is clear. Where do we begin? Is there a starting point for considering faith beyond Christendom? Please join Homebrewed Christianity's new online class, Rise of Bonhoeffer, Faith, Resistance, and Theology in Action. This class is hosted by Drs. Tripp Fuller and Jeffrey Pugh, with a list of top experts on Bonhoeffer. This important class is donation-based, including free. So please go to www.homebrewedchristianity.com to register today. This episode of Madang Podcast is sponsored by Penautum, the Pacific Asian and North American Asian women in theology and ministry. Please join their 40th anniversary conference on March 27 to 29 at Columbia Theological Seminary. It will begin with an open panel around the kitchen table, passing down recipes, which is free and open to the public. Please support Penautum, and to donate to Penautum, please visit www.panaawtm.org. I'm so grateful to Eerdmans Publishing for supporting this episode. They have been a wonderful sponsor of Madang Podcast. Please check out all their new releases on theology and the Bible. Please order Munther Isaac's new book, Christ in the Rubble, Faith, the Bible, and the Genocide in Gaza, published by Eerdmans. Please sign up for their Eerdword for all the latest news on forthcoming books and author news. Visit www.eerdmans.com.
For sponsorship inquiries, please email madangpodcast.gmail.com. This is Madang, an outdoor living room for guests to share their experiences and their work. I invite you to come in and stay for a while.
Welcome to Madang Podcast. Today's special guest is Reverend Dr. Munther Isaac, who is a Palestinian Christian theologian who serves as a pastor of the Evangelical Lutheran Christmas Church in Bethlehem and the Lutheran Church in Beit Sahour. He served as the academic dean of the Bethlehem Bible College, is now the director of the Bethlehem Institute of Peace and Justice. He is the author of several books, From Land to Lands, From Eden to the Renewed Earth, The Other Side of the Wall, and Christ in the Rubble. Today, he is with us to share his latest book, published from Eerdmans. Thank you so much, Dr. Isaac, for coming on Madang Podcast. I know you're so busy with all your other work at the Institute, and you've been on TV and numerous interviews. So thank you so much for taking the time to come on.
No, of course. Thank you for having me. It's an honor and my joy.
Yeah, thank you. And it was a joy to meet you in person before this genocide in Gaza. You know, we were there in Dr. Mitri's university, Dar al-Kilima University, and you were the moderator in the panel that me and Miguel de la Torre and others were on.
Yes, and that was just a few days before October 7th.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe. Now it's been almost, 16 months?
Yeah.
Really hard to believe.
It's unbelievable. I know you weren't there the last night of the conference. I had taken my daughter and that, and then I also broke my knee during my time there. But the last night, we had a really big dinner outside in that courtyard in the university, and people were just dancing. So I couldn't dance, but my daughter, I was like filming it. It was such a joyous event. And then we came home the next day, and then a day and a half later, when I saw the news, I thought I had seen something wrong. I couldn't believe what was happening in Gaza.
Yeah, and glad you mentioned this because I hope this is the image and this is what people think when they think of Palestinians, people who
Yeah.
love life,
Uh-huh.
people who just want to live in dignity in their own homeland.
Yeah.
One of the things that continues to shock me,
Mhm.
even today as we speak, is the images we still get from Gaza, not just the destruction that I've been speaking a lot about, but also the joy that we see
Yeah.
in many people when they dance, when
Uh-huh.
they sing
Oh,
music.
yeah.
I'm in awe of those who volunteer to sing for the children, for example. And we see the children singing loud and with defiance. We see many of these images even today
Oh,
from the midst of rubble and the tents of displacement.
oh,
People find any reason to celebrate and to have to sing. Palestinians love life,
yeah.
and I continue to weep and lament for years and years of war and destruction for people who don't deserve this really.
Yeah. So, with all that dancing and laughter until, October 7th, and I am, you've written several books, but today we're going to discuss Christ and the Rubble, Faith, the Bible, and the Genocide in Gaza, published by Eerdmans Press. And it is one of the most important books I've read. So I'm just so grateful that you wrote this, and I'm sure it was not an easy book for you to write. How did you decide to begin writing the book?
Yes, it was not easy at all.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a moment in which I decided, let me write a book, but the book was the result of my ministry over the last 16 months. I found myself in the midst of this genocide that was unfolding as one of the people who spoke against it and received a platform, a global platform, that honestly I'm still shocked on how things work. That all of a sudden I'm a pastor of a church in Bethlehem and received this global attention and platform. And I was able to uh, reach out to millions upon millions through my sermons,
Yeah.
through my interviews, both the sermons I gave here or around the world. And so when I thought of all of that, I said, let me write a book that brings together the message in a more detailed way that talks about what really happened on October 7th. Why did it, how did we get here?
Yeah.
What was the context? But also to share the sermons that I did, the ministry, and the impact. Most importantly, also the people I met throughout this last 16, the stories that happened with me when I traveled, and to see the impact of my sermons and interviews all over the world was overwhelming. So I decided to write a book about it. Uh, and many people kept telling me, your message is so important and so needed. Um, you know, this is a war in which I challenge the silence of many, and I challenge not just the silence, the neutrality, or even the what I called in the book the naive idea of peacemaking, which assumes neutrality and positioning yourself in the middle. When there is a situation of a genocide, you can't do that. So that message needed to be heard. And the challenge to the Western Church for its complicity in this war, I wanted it to be heard and documented in the book. And that's why I decided to move from the sermons and the ministry into writing it in a book.
Yeah, no, it's such an important book. You documented so many events, historical events and present events, and political speeches and your own sermons. And I followed you since the genocide happened, and your sermons were so prophetic, and I was thrilled. And one of my friends is Chris Hedges, and I know you were on his interview recently, and he sent it to me right away. He goes, "You're going to like this," because him and I have been doing ongoing
Mm.
conversations about what is happening in Gaza, and I really appreciated your interview there. And in all the TV networks, it's so amazing, and the courage that you showed through those interviews, and also in this book. And so when I read the book, like seeing it from afar and living in the US, tell us why white people, especially here in North America and in Europe, got the whole message wrong, that it was okay to do what Israel was doing. How did we get this so wrong?
Yeah, in the book, I talk about at least three factors that enabled this. These are coloniality, this idea of colonialism and everything that comes with it. The fact that we are not just entitled, but we bring with us when we colonize other nations and other lands a superior culture, a superior, even a religion and theology. Um, and so that's part of it. And today, the relationship between America and Israel is clearly one of interest.
Mm,
Uh, the phrase that keeps repeating, Israel is our best ally. Now, if you think really, what does that mean? It
yeah,
means Israel helps us get our interest in the Middle East, helps us continue to take advantage of the resources there. Uh, and so that's one element of it that I think many people missed, because there are many who are actually not necessarily religious or believers, but at the same time support Israel for these cultural reasons. We call them cultural Zionists. And I'm also convinced racism is part of it.
yeah,
And when I talk about racism, I mean the fact that a whole people, the Palestinians or even Arabs, were deemed unworthy or less human.
yeah,
And I am so convinced of this now that they don't see us as humans, that many don't see us, or at least they see us as less humans. Uh, and if you look at the statements that were said, whether by Christian leaders or theologians or politicians, they all reflect this understanding that to them Palestinians are less humans. That's why, in that, the only reason that would make it okay in someone's mind to kill 200 Palestinians just to either rescue a hostage or kill a, declared terrorist is if you don't believe these 200 Palestinians that you killed to implement your purpose are equal humans. You wouldn't do it in any other context. So I'm very convinced now, and I've been saying it, that uh, they don't see us as equals, which is, by the way, behind the concept of Christ in the rubble, because I insisted we see Jesus' image in
yeah,
everyone, in every child pulled from under the rubble. And of course, theology. I mean, part of it is theology. Whether you declare Palestinians the Amalekites of the Bible, or you just assume uh, God gave the land to a certain people. God favors certain people. Some people are superior in God's plans or receive certain privileges. Christian Zionism, we all know about it. It's well documented. But I think it's about time that we talk about the really what is at the core of this theology of Christian Zionism, the belief of a tribal, violent God, a tribal, even violent, racist God. And in that ideology, Palestinians are less humans. Uh, because, Grace, honestly, how do you justify? The
you can,
world is watching for more than 16 months a
yeah,
genocide being broadcast live on Earth, not just by the people of Gaza, by the way. Even the soldiers themselves are documenting what they're doing.
yeah,
And no one seems to have this alarm to stop it. How else would you justify that? There is, deep rooted, dehumanization of Palestinians. This does not happen by day and night. And that's why, to me, maybe one of the most important insights that I stress in this book, which is something I actually got from a theologian from Gaza, a dear friend of mine, a Palestinian Christian from Gaza, Yusuf Al-Khouri. And he said that this genocide began when Palestine was described as a land without people.
Mm.
So they looked at the land, they saw Palestinians, but they still thought of it as a land without people. That means those people could be displaced, ethnically cleansed, or even killed, which is what we're seeing now in this genocide, because it's an empty land, not literally, but in terms of people of equal worth, of people that they have deemed less human.
You know, it's so painful for you to listen to you now and also read it in your book, that you basically said that Palestinians are viewed or have been marginalized, dehumanized, and demonized. And that is so painful for me to read because, you know, I've traveled to different parts of the world, and I think the place that I experienced the most hospitality was actually in Palestine. So, as I mentioned earlier, I fell the second day there and I broke my knee and I was in a lot of pain. And before the conference began, they took us to little villages. And one time I was at a village and the bathrooms were down at like long steps to like really down. I don't know, it was like a one level lower than the street level. And I couldn't walk down there because of my broken knee. I was in a wheelchair. And so the workers were like walking around trying to find where I can go. And then they said, "Oh, I can go to someone's house." And I said, "No, no, no, I feel really bad entering someone's house." And they said, "No, no, no." She said it was okay. So an old grandmother opened the door for me and let me use her restroom. She was so kind. She couldn't speak English, but then afterwards, she offered me cookies and juice. And I felt so guilty. And I said, "It's okay." But then she insisted. So I took the juice. And then I walked out and I thought, you know what? That would have never happened in the US. You can't go into anybody's house. If you go in the wrong house, they may, you know, these Americans, some of them are carrying guns. But the hospitality, that's just one example that, you know, the Palestinians have these deep joy within them, as you mentioned, and the joy that I saw and the hospitality. I have no idea why. And I know Dr. Mitri, when we were there, was mentioning how even Hollywood, you know, movies always continue to make Palestinians a villain, you know, making them demonize. It's so painful for me to see. And I think your book and your, you know, your prophetic voice is helping to change that narrative. And I've been telling everybody since my trip, you know, these stories over and over again. You know, these are just small examples, but I'm just grateful for your witness. And even in your
Thank you.
book, you wrote down, "I was traumatized. I was in tears. I was angry at God when you were writing this book." How, I don't know how you were able to write this book.
Well, as a pastor, you have to struggle with these. You can't, you know, it's part of the job. At least if you're a pastor in Palestine,
Uh-huh.
where this is life. You know, um, we are now used to waiting hours at checkpoints. We're used to seeing images of people killed, or many of those we know were killed. And if you live in this land, you can't ignore this reality. And as a pastor who thinks deeply about these issues, um, I must admit, yes, many times, you know, I pour my anger at God. In the book, I mentioned the story of when the church of St. Porphyrios was bombed,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
the beginning of the war.
Yeah.
And of course, anything I describe is nothing in comparison to the trauma the people in the church felt. The fact that, you know, you're sleeping in a home with young families, the designated area for young families with children. And next thing you know, you're pulling everyone from under the rubble looking for survivors. 18 people were killed in that attack. For us on this side, in the West Bank, the attack happened on the day which we held a prayer not just for peace, but we prayed for the safety. And of course, as Christians, we prayed particularly for the safety of our relatives, our loved ones, our friends in the churches. So you pray fervently for this war to end, because we were all shocked, especially in the beginning, by the horrifying images, by the nature of the images we're seeing. So we're praying. And then you go home and this happens. And you wonder, does God actually care? Honestly. What amazes me is that the people inside the churches who were under this attack don't ask these questions, but always say, thank God for safety, for those who survive. Or, even in the midst of those who lost loved ones, they would say what Job said, the Lord gives, the Lord takes away. It's hard. It's honestly hard. And preaching, talking about the love of God in such a time is hard and it's challenging. It's a test of faith.
Yeah.
Would you continue to talk about the love of God when every single day for now 16 months you see, we witness the butchering of our people? So part of this book is me documenting my own struggle to keep faith, to keep our faith. And I must admit that we are inspired here in the West Bank, in this side, by the resilience of the people of Gaza. I keep saying, if they have the faith, we shouldn't complain. If they kept their faith, then we should not complain.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that, because I know in part of the book you wrote down that writing this was a lament. So I appreciated you being so honest and so open and vulnerable as you wrote the book. I know when the attack, October 7th, happened, everybody, they're like, you got to begin by, condemning them. And you went through that, and then you also discuss in your book, genocide is not a matter of opinion. I appreciated that part because after the attack, and then a SBL sent out some, crazy memo, and Dr. Mitri sent out to many of us to get signatures to go against the statement from SBL. And I remember so many people around me that I emailed and asked to sign said, well, they don't know if this is a genocide. And to me, it was so puzzling. So I appreciated when you wrote down genocide is not a matter of opinion. So can you say a little bit more about genocide?
Yeah, it's important because when we use terms like genocide or apartheid before the war, we were talking about apartheid, and still today, these words have definitions in international treaties. They don't have to do with a matter of subjective opinion, but you look at the definition and then you ask yourself, is what Israel is doing, does it fit with the definition in the Geneva treaties? And more scholars of genocide and Holocaust concur easily that yes, what is the definition of genocide in the Geneva treaties fits almost verbatim to what Israel is doing to Gazans right now. I find it amazing, honestly. I really find it amazing that Israeli Jewish scholars in the Hebrew University have no problem actually confessing that it is a genocide. They realize. Yet church leaders always tell me, no, it's too strong. You're using a strong language. And it's as if all of these conventions and laws that, we met as humanity and wrote, and we said never again. I mean, why does these treaties exist? Because you don't want to do this again. You don't want this to happen again. Yet when it comes to the Palestinians, it became yet again. And everyone seems to completely ignore this reality. And honestly, part of writing this book was this discovery that in many universities around the world, many important universities, there are whole departments dedicated to the study of genocide and Holocaust. And in many cases, they are led for Jewish scholars for obvious reasons, because Jews, if there is any people group that knows about genocide, and it's the Jewish people who've been through the horrific Holocaust. 6 million people were butchered. And the number of scholars, including Jewish scholars, who agreed that this is a genocide, who wrote statements that this is a genocide, is and by the way, it continues to increase. I finished the first manuscript months ago, and if
Okay.
I had the chance now for a second version, I will add even more testimonies why this is a genocide and why we need to deal with this as such. And again, going back to what I shared earlier, it is yet one more confirmation of the racism of the Western world, because they lectured us on these treaties. They kept saying never again. Then they happened with their weapons against Palestinians, and all of a sudden they find all these excuses as to why this is not a genocide, and even justifying it, even calling it self-defense. It's amazing to me.
Yeah.
And I say this in a sad way. When I say amazing, it's shocking to me
Yeah.
that groups like the SPL
Yeah.
and many church leaders, many church statements, I talk about them in the book.
Yeah.
And I only cite obvious examples. I could have doubled the size of this book about the church statements. They immediately condemned October 7th, immediately,
Yeah.
using the strongest language possible. Actually, during this year, when I meet with church leaders, I tell them what happened to me is that it appears to me you went to the dictionary and you looked for all the strong words you can use and applied them onto what Hamas did. And to my knowledge, none of them, now even 16 months later, close to 50,000 killed, close to 17,000 children killed, none of them used strong language to condemn Israel. I mean, what else? How else can you justify this? They don't look at us as humans. And that's why you see anger and lament in my book. And that's why in the book, I speak in a strong language, maybe criticizing and calling out the church for its complicity in what happened.
Yeah. No, your book is just full of information and, what the churches did and the mainline churches that you wouldn't expect. And so I was really grateful for that. And I would encourage you to write volume 2. I think that needs to be done. All the stuff that you didn't get to include in this book, I think you can write a volume 2 in Christ in the Rubble, because the West just doesn't read enough information about what is actually happening in Gaza, and they don't even know, the word that Palestinians use, a Nakba. So I think that needs to be told and retold. And when I was trying to get signatures, these are like PhD people, professors, who couldn't decide whether it was a genocide or not, being fearful of going against Israel. So that was really painful. So in your book, you cover Nakba. So can you tell us, the listeners who may have never heard of this, and that will then help everyone to understand October 7th way better and clearer.
Yeah, one of the things I spent a good time on the book on is setting the context or explaining the context.
Yeah.
And of course, when I say we need to understand the context, I'm not justifying what happened on October 7th. I don't condone violence at all. If my theology, and like most Palestinian Christian theologians and movements, is purely nonviolent. We believe in creative resistance. And of course, I would be a big hypocrite if I cite, the international law and say war crimes happen, and then if Palestinians do them and I don't call them out. But we need to understand the context, and it shocks me. It shocked me in this war that so many people isolated October 7th as if it's an event that happened out of nowhere, as if Palestinians woke up in the morning and decided, we hate Jews, let's kill Jews. And then this is how it started. And it shocks me because this is the, maybe this is behind the obsession with, do you condemn Hamas? Do you have, and you would think that a simple detail like that 70% or more of the people of Gaza today are actually survivors of the Nakba. What that means is that these are 70% of the people of Gaza were ethnically cleansed, were displaced. And by the way, ethnic cleansing is one of those terms that I just don't use lightly. There's a definition. An Israeli historian, Israeli Jewish historian, Ilan Pappé, said the definition of ethnic cleansing applies verbatim, these are his words, to what Israel did in 1948 to the Palestinians, uprooting us from our towns, destroying the towns so that we don't get back to them, denying us the right to return to these lands. And then Palestinians ended up in refugee camps. And 70% of the people of Gaza are refugees from 1948. And I don't want us to pass by this quickly. Here's why. Because the Zionists and their allies continue to refer to the immigration of Jews to Palestine and the establishment of the State of Israel as Jewish, quote, return to the land. And you think return? Well, they would cite, yeah, look at biblical times, Jews lived here. So in their mind, they are endorsing the so-called return of Jews to Palestine because Jews lived in Palestine 3,000 years ago or so. And then they deny the right of Palestinians to return to their homes, not just land, homes, actual physical homes that still exist from 75, 76 years ago. I mean, I wish people listen to themselves. Are you really serious? And so the Palestinians in Gaza are descendants or are Nakba survivors. Some of them, lived the Nakba in 1948, those with old age. And so how did we miss this when we talk about what happened on October 7th? The fact that those refugees were denied their rights to return, lived in refugee camps all their lives, did not receive statehood or self-determination, and then for the last 16 years before the war, lived under the most brutal dehumanization siege, to the extent that the General Secretary of the United Nations said, if there is hell on earth for children, it is hell for the children of Gaza. He said this before October 7th. So the Nakba is what happened in 1948. Precisely that. And it's sad that we have to continue to tell people this, that Israel was not created on an empty land.
Yeah.
Israel was created literally on the ruins of the towns and villages of the people of Gaza and others in refugee camps in Lebanon, Syria, and all over the world now displaced or relocated in other places. Close to 750,000 people became refugees then. And for years, when we used to talk about the rights of Palestinians and mentioned the number 700,000 to 800,000 Palestinians became refugees, that evoked shock in people. We didn't know this. Today, we're talking about 2 million refugees, Grace, in Gaza, 2 million displaced. So, when will this stop? When will the fate of Palestinians stop in which they are ethnically cleansed from their land and then blamed for it? Okay, then blamed for it. And so what we've witnessed, especially at the beginning of the war, is politicians, media by and large, especially the Western media, and to my shock and horror, church leaders, including, I would expect this from the evangelicals, the Zionists, the Christian Zionists, some evangelicals or most, but even mainline liberal progressive churches, even our friends, people who come and meet with us, who completely isolated October 7th as a hate, attack without any reference to context. And, as I said, referencing the context is not justifying it. When slaves attack their slave, those who enslaved them, imagine if you describe these attacks by the slaves against those who enslaved them as just hate attacks from the blacks against the white, without mentioning, oh, by the way, they were slaves. Or mentioning the attacks by the indigenous communities in the United States against the colonizers, without mentioning, oh, by the way, they took their land. It's that shocked us, that no one mentioned the context. And it's not as if we're talking about years of enmity, as if 200-300 years ago, 75 years ago. And the Palestinians, the wrong that happened to the Palestinians, the Nakba in 1948, was not made right. And as I said, to see church leaders repeat the Zionist lines and as if promote the Zionist, as I call it in the book, the colonial narrative, is really sad. And it's really one of the reasons why, I said what I said in the sermon that went viral in Christmas and now became the theme of the book about how you ignored the total context and began from one incident.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that here on Madang Podcast and in the book. You do such a good job. You include the political and the religious history and the context. And I remember, and you included the clip about when Hillary Clinton was interviewed in The View. And I remember, I don't watch The View, but I see it on my social media feed. And she was asked about ceasefire, and she's like, people don't know what they're talking about. I was horrified to see that and hear that in one hand, but not so much. A few years back, I co-wrote a piece for Time magazine where we called out Hillary and other Democrats who were warmongers. But the quote that you included was, ceasefire. What about ceasefire? And she said, well, that was October 6th. So I don't know if you want to say more about that. And also you quote Anne Graham Lotz, who is Billy Graham's daughter, about how Arabs are destined by God to hate Jews. Like these hateful messages by politicians and by so-called religious leaders, etc., just didn't help with this whole narrative about who the Palestinians are and who the Jewish people are. So it was so painful for me to watch from the US side. But if you can say a little bit more, because your book, you include so many quotes from politicians and from leaders, which was so helpful for readers like me.
Yeah, and this was, for the last, as I said, talking about what happened in the last fall. Imagine now with the Trump administration, what we're hearing from Stefanik or Huckabee, it's shocking. It's really shocking.
Jared.
In the book, in the book, I talk about congressmen who repeated the line, if you bless Israel, God will bless you. I mean, it shocks me that a congressman would have a conversation in a hearing in the Congress with the president of Columbia University and said, do you want Columbia University to be cursed by God for allowing demonstrations for a ceasefire on the university campus? But, it varies because what Hillary said is pure deception.
Yeah.
It's not as if Hillary is ignorant. It's not just deception, but it's all this, as I said, what I described, the dehumanization of Palestinians. Because in her logic, she's telling us a siege in which the amount of calories that entered Gaza were calculated. This is how dehumanizing the siege of Gaza was. Hell on earth for the people of Gaza for 16 years. Hillary described it as ceasefire. That's her concept of ceasefire, and as I said, she knows, she's a politician. She was a Secretary of the State. She knows exactly what's happening in Gaza.
Yeah.
But to still talk about it as ceasefire, because again, to her, if we lock 2 million Palestinians behind walls and subjugate them to brutal siege with little, minimum food and aid, that's fine. That's peace. That's good. They shouldn't complain. They shouldn't try to end this. And by the way, just for the record, and it's another thing I talk about in the book, for those who lecture us on nonviolence, the people of Gaza tried nonviolence for a whole year. For a whole year, and they were met with violence. And in addition to that, I mentioned in the book the many quotes of Christian leaders who seem to live in an alternative universe. They're so detached from reality. and interpret events today purely through the lens of their very narrow theology. And again, this is the, I think I need one day to write a book about theology of humility, in which, when you talk about what's happening, at least have, but you have these theologians who assume they have the only right interpretation of the Bible and then impose that interpretation on us. So in her mind, as she said, not as I said, as she wrote, we're destined to hate the Jews. It's unbelievable. Similarly, other Christians would say, this is all in the context of the war on Gaza. Let's remember that to reject that God gave the land to the Jews is the spirit of Amalek.
Yeah.
Now, do you know what that means? That means I deserve to be erased completely from earth if I don't accept that my house today belongs to a Jewish person in Brooklyn. And these are church leaders who want to tell us God is love and that God cares for all people. And again, I only chose few examples in the book. And I could have, believe me, in my preparation for the book, I did not include all the examples that I wanted to use because, it would have been very repetitive. And so for me as a pastor here in Palestine, it's double the pain because these are my siblings, supposedly my siblings in Christ, calling for my total destruction and justifying the genocide against my people.
Yeah. No, to read all the material that you put in the book, the ones I think you didn't include, I think you could include in the second volume because it won't be repetitive when we just don't understand what is happening and the grave consequences of bad theology. I think that, that has caused genocide and wars around the world. And so it's really painful for me to see. I think a key concept in your book that you cover is settler colonialism. And I don't think the people in the West quite understand. So if you can tie that with the Nakba, I think you did it beautifully in the book. And you said that it's one of the biggest misconceptions about what is happening in Palestine. So if you can share a little bit about what settler colonialism is.
Yeah. So as I said, it's one of the biggest misconceptions because, it's always assumed that Zionism brought a refuge to the Jewish people, or that, there is a conflict in Palestine between two sides, Palestinians and Israelis. That's why in the book, from the outset, I said, I don't believe there is a conflict. There is a reality of oppression and colonization. Zionism, by definition, is the establishment of a homeland for the Jewish people in Palestine. And many times when I argue with Christian Zionists, I tell them Zionism is not the idea that Jews wanted to come to Palestine to seek refuge and live with Palestinians or live, with Arabs and enjoy protection or freedom, as happened in the past, by the way. When, for example, Jews would escape the Inquisitions of Europe, they would come to Arab and Muslim countries. Zionism was the establishment of a homeland for the Jewish people in Palestine. And as the Zionist leaders themselves said, Palestine is like a beautiful bride, but it's taken. They knew that Palestine was not empty. So they sought to establish a homeland for the Jewish people in someone else's land. They moved from Europe to someone else's land, knowing too well that that land was not empty, and knowing too well that for them to establish a homeland, they have to empty it. They have to create opportunities or use war to empty Palestine from the land. And this is behind the conclusions of many Jewish historians like Ilan Pappé and even Benny Morris that what happened, yes, is ethnic cleansing. The Zionist leaders themselves realized this. And the concept of a Jewish state is, again, by definition, exclusive. This is why I say I wish people understand what Zionism is.
Yeah.
So colonialism is that. It's when it became, the state of Israel, when it was established by European immigrants who created a homeland for themselves on someone else's land. And the difference between colonialism and settler colonialism is that in settler colonialism, you go and you settle on someone else's land. And in most cases, you displace that people. There's colonialism when you have troops and bases and control the resources of another land, but you don't necessarily establish a homeland of that land. In the case of Israel, no, they were clear. We're moving to Palestine to establish a homeland for ourselves on the turf of Palestinians. And if we have to displace Palestinians, we'll do it. This is the reality we live in even today. And to me, that's important to underscore, because the question we need to ask is, how do you move forward? And as I say in the conclusion of the book, settler colonialism usually ends either by one side eliminating the other completely, which would be tragic, or by the idea of sharing the land, which is what I wrote about in my first book, The Other Side of the Wall, that I believe God's ultimate vision is for us to share the land. Unless, Israel believes, as the party with power, okay, let's give Palestinians a piece of land for their own state. Let's divide the land. But even that, they didn't want to give us, the two-state solution. So the dilemma is now we live in this constant fear now, especially as we see what's happening in the West Bank today after Gaza, is that Israel is now determined to continue the project by completely emptying Palestine from its indigenous people. Now we're having this conversation after the book was published, but now President Trump is openly circulating the idea that Jordan and Egypt must take the Palestinians of Gaza. Ethnic cleansing, emptying the land. That's the Zionist project. And that's why it's important to understand Israel for what it really is, the policies that it puts on the ground, apartheid, and for what it really is, if we want to have a real solution. You can't have a solution for a problem if you have the wrong diagnosis.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Your book covers so much information. You talk about apartheid and how, people don't understand. Even Desmond Tutu was talking about it. You cover that. You cover racism. You cover so much. And so we don't have all day to cover, which I wish we did, because you are so brilliant in writing this book. You do talk about at the end, which is important. So if we can kind of talk about that before we wrap up, the theology of empire and theology of genocide. As a theologian myself, I found it very helpful because I think people just have bad theology. They are misinterpreting, when you talk about the Amalekites and, Benjamin talking about that and other Christian leaders talking about that, and misunderstanding, 2000 years ago and now and the present reality. I just don't understand how people have got Palestine so wrong and villainizing the people. So if you can say a bit about the theology of genocide and empire, I think that would be a really good way for people to kind of maybe move forward.
Yeah, theology of the empire, as I call it in the book, comes with this assumption that we tell you how to read the Bible,
Yeah.
and they always read the Bible for their own benefit.
Yeah.
Part of what the theology of empire feeds on is this idea of demonizing the others. You need an enemy to demonize, to give legitimacy to your violence. There's nothing new, unfortunately, whether through history or whether in the recent history. And that's what happened to the Palestinians in this theology. It's a theology that, in addition to promoting this idea of, as I said, tribal racist God who privileges people, he becomes a God who deems other people as inferior, as I said, less. Because when you justify all of this in the name of God, calling Palestinians as Amalekites, deserving to be, totally raised from the face of the earth, you're doing it even in the name of God, and that's a sad thing. You ask, how did we get it wrong? Tragically, this is not the first time. And it begs the question, is it really that we got it wrong, or is it the other way around? That, we make the Bible says what we want it to make. When I think, for example, and I wrote about it in the book, I was honored, privileged to go and visit South Africa in May of last year, spent time with giants of faith, those who struggled in the anti-apartheid, and then they would take me to a church where they said, this is where the first sermon supporting apartheid was given. I went to a seminary, they said, this is where the theologians who wrote about why apartheid is biblical, this is where they taught. And I couldn't help but think, how does anyone read the Bible and conclude, oh, apartheid is what the Bible teaches? Until you realize it's the other way around. You make the Bible say what you want it to say. And I was reminded of something I've heard some years ago, how in the beginning, God created us in his own image. And since then, humankind has been returning the favor, creating God in our own image. So we project our own supremacy on the nature of God. This is the theology of empire in its essence. It's not as if we get it wrong, honestly. It's more that we project our own selves, visions, prejudice, supremacy, violence on religion, the Bible, and God, and then create a theology that supports this. How else would you support, as I said, apartheid, genocide, slavery, and so on? If you look at history, the things that the Bible was used to justify, sadly, we're doing it again, and now the consequences are so tragic for the Palestinians.
Thank you so much for that. And, your book is just important piece of theological and biblical scholarship. And you do end with the moral compass of the world, that Gaza has become the moral compass of the world, a test of global moral integrity. And I really believe that. And I'm so grateful of how you conclude the book. So I'm hoping that all the listeners will order Christ in the Rubble, Faith, the Bible, and the Genocide in Gaza, published by Eerdmans. And I know, Dr. Isaac, you do the event Christ at the Checkpoint. I don't know if you wanted to share anything about that before we close the interview.
Christ at the Checkpoint is a conference and a movement that we started at Bethlehem Bible College in 2010. It's designed as a series of conversations we have, and we say we need to have these conversations at the checkpoint. We want to talk about reality from faith perspective. We want to have a conversation between our realities, symbolized by the checkpoint, and our faith, symbolized by Christ, and ask, if Jesus stands in front of a checkpoint today, what would his message be? The Palestinian crossing, waiting for hours, being humiliated, or even to the Israeli soldier. We wanted to shift the discourse from one that focused on eschatology, on end times, on Christian Zionist view, into one that focused on daily lives, on practice, on ethics, on justice, and ask, how can we as Christians, when we read the Bible, use it for the service of justice and peace? So we've been having these conversations every other years. We've had many versions since then, since 2010. We've had just one in 2024. In the midst of the genocide, we had over 100 visitors from outside who came in solidarity, say we are in solidarity with you. Usually we attract diverse views. It's not always those who support the Palestinian cause who attend Christ at the Checkpoint. And most of our speakers are usually evangelicals, because we want to have this conversation within an evangelical context. For we feel it's there where it's precisely or mostly missed. This is where they miss the point. And it's there where they have so much political influence. So as I said, we've had one last year and hoping to have one again, continue with this movement in 2026 and hope we attract one more time hundreds of believers from all over the world who will come and join us in our plight, in our lament, in our struggle to make sense of reality through our faith and hopefully be used by God as instruments of peace and justice in this land.
Thank you so much, Dr. Isaac, for sharing that and for writing this very important prophetic book. It was so meaningful for me, and I was so moved reading your book. It's so important. I know I will be using it in my own research, my writing, and in my classes. I hope people can use it in the churches. I also preach at a church, so I'll be sharing the book with them. I hope that many people will be able to read your book and be moved and be challenged. You know, you really give a prophetic voice, and I'm just so thankful for your courage and your perseverance. It must have been so difficult the last 16 months. I don't know how you and many others who are doing the same work and the advocacy was able to just keep carrying on. You know, you gave so much courage to so many of us who were so afraid, even in our own comfort of our home. So thank you so much. And to all the Madang listeners, please order Christ in the Rubble, Faith, the Bible, and the Genocide in Gaza by Reverend Dr. Munther Isaac and published by Eerdmans Press.
Thank you again for having me.
We live in a time of crisis upon crisis, and yet the church is silent. The need, or better put, the demand for a new trajectory of faith is clear. Where do we begin? Is there a starting point for considering faith beyond Christendom? Please join Homebrewed Christianity's new online class, Rise of Bonhoeffer, Faith, Resistance, and Theology in Action. This class is hosted by Drs. Tripp Fuller and Jeffrey Pugh, with a list of top experts on Bonhoeffer. This important class is donation-based, including free. So please go to www.homebrewedchristianity.com to register today. This episode of Madang Podcast is sponsored by Penautum, the Pacific Asian and North American Asian women in theology and ministry. Please join their 40th anniversary conference on March 27 to 29 at Columbia Theological Seminary. It will begin with an open panel around the kitchen table, passing down recipes, which is free and open to the public. Please support Penautum, and to donate to Penautum, please visit www.panaawtm.org. I'm so grateful to Eerdmans Publishing for supporting this episode. They have been a wonderful sponsor of Madang Podcast. Please check out all their new releases on theology and the Bible. Please order Munther Isaac's new book, Christ in the Rubble, Faith, the Bible, and the Genocide in Gaza, published by Eerdmans. Please sign up for their Word for all the latest news on forthcoming books and author news. Visit www.eerdmans.com.
For sponsorship inquiries, please email madangpodcast.gmail.com.